In this example, what I want to do is I want to take a look at Cognito user pools. And what Cognito user pools are it's basically a resource that Amazon provides to handle your user creation and authentication and authorization. Okay, so I want to walk through that today and kind of the settings of the Cognito user pool. In order to do it, I always find it useful to create a client application that's going to use that pool. So in our case, we're going to use React. And again, you could plug this into your CI/CD pipeline that we covered in one of our previous videos. For today, though, I just want to focus on how do I authenticate my users and how do I create users so that my application can use them. So I'm going to use React again. So what I'm going to do is npx create React app. And then my React app that I want to create is going to be Cognito React tutorial. Okay, and that's going to kick off the process of creating a new React application on my desktop. And so you'll see creating a new React app on my desktop. It's going to have some packages that are there, and that's all great. In the meantime, I've logged into my AWS Management Console. I'm going to go to the Cognito service. So there's some configuration we have to do here. And what I want to do is I want to create a user pool. Okay, so I'm in Cognito, I'm managing my user pools. I'm going to go ahead and create a user pool. The pool name that I'm going to use is going to be Cognito React tutorial, so matching my application name. And then I want to step through the settings. Okay, so how users sign in, so I can choose to have them sign in with a username. I'm going to have them sign in with an email address. By default, usernames are case insensitive, passwords are case sensitive. I can choose which attributes I want to require during my sign up. I can also come in and customize it to say, these are not the attributes that I'm interested in. I want to have additional attributes, so I can make my own attributes. Password strength requirements. I'm going to require a number, a special character, an uppercase letter, or a lowercase letter. And I am going to allow users to sign up themselves. So I'm creating a web application. I want users to say, hey, I'm interested in the application. Let me go ahead and sign up. So administrators are not going to be required to create the user accounts. Temporary passwords expire after 7 days. We're not going to enable multi-factor authentication. So where this would come into play and where you've probably seen it is if you do any kind of online banking. So online banking has requirements about multi-factor authentication, so we could have it here. Users are going to recover their account through email. I'm going to verify that this is a valid user by forcing them to go through the email verification. And I'm going to use Cognito to send my messages. So I could use SNS, which is Simple Notification Service. So AWS has that tool there. Cognito is fine, though, for this example. So I can customize my messages. Okay, so if I'm going to do that, I have to deal with SES, Simple Email Service, but I don't want to configure that, so I'm going to use Cognito. And what I'm going to do is, you've all seen these messages. I'm just going to have them click a link to verify that their email address is correct. I'm not customizing anything. We'll actually see this. I'll show you in my email what it looks like. Okay. And then I can tag it, again, to kind of bill for activity. Do I want to remember users' devices? I'm going to choose no in this case. Which app clients will have access to this user pool? Okay, so what I want to do is if I skip back over to my terminal window, we've created this React app. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and change my working directory into that Cognito tutorial, and then I'm going to say go ahead and open up that directory in Atom. Okay, so that directory launches in Atom. Here's my application. So this is the Cognito React tutorial. The source code is here. App.js is where things actually happen. So what I want to do is I am going to write some React code, and some of the React code will definitely be new to you, especially if you haven't taken the advanced JavaScript or have JavaScript background or have React background. This'll definitely look new to you, but I think that's okay. Okay, well, I'll kind of explain it as we go. But point being is I want this web application to have access to my Cognito pool. So I have to add an application client. Okay, so my app client name is going to be web. Okay, and I can choose, I'm going to leave all the rest of this stuff as the default. Okay, it's going to give me a client ID, which is going to be important. It allows me to customize all of the different steps for creating an account and authenticating an account using Lambda. Okay, but for now we don't have to do any of that. We're going to review and hit OK. Okay, so our pool ID is going to be important. And then our app clients, we have one app client, and that's going to be important as well. Okay. In the app client settings, one thing we do have to do is in the domain name, we have to add a domain name. So what ends up happening is, and where this comes into play is I'm going to have users sign up for new accounts. So I want to be able to create a user account. And when they create a user account, they get an email confirmation saying, hey, I noticed that you created an account. Can you confirm that this is a valid email address? So you're not spamming my site, and I know that I have valid users. When I click on that, it's going to be hosted on AWS. So I don't have to have a proper domain name or anything like that. I don't have to pay for a domain name. I can host it on AWS. But that domain name is going to show up in the confirmation. So basically, this is basically like a confirmation splash screen saying, hey, that your account has now been confirmed. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to call this my Cognito React tutorial. Okay, it tells me the domain's not available. So I'm going to go with Cognito React tutorial cloud for devs. Okay, it still tells me it's not available. Let me just do cloud for developers. Okay, the domain is available. I'm going to go ahead and save the changes. Okay, so that domain name is now set up. Okay, I still think I'm missing something in here. Maybe not. I thought I was. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so I have a user pool. That user pool has a pool ID. I have an application that can access the user pool. That application has an application ID. And now we can start to go work on our React application. So if I skip over to my terminal window, in order for this to work, I'm going to need an AWS component. So I'm going to do an npm install. So I'm in that Cognito React tutorial directory. So I'm going to do an npm install of Amazon-Cognito-identity-js. Okay, so I'm installing that component because we're going to need it for our React application so that our React application can interact with AWS Cognito. Okay, and I'm going to get some errors, but I think for the most part it installs successfully. And now I should be able to do an npm start. And what that'll do is it'll launch my application. And I'm just going to get rid of my bookmarks bar. It'll launch my React application, and we've seen this in the past. So this is just a demo React app that comes up, and it tells us we can edit source/app.js. So that's where we want to start working, is that source/app.js. And I'm going to do that in Atom. So that's the file we have right here. I want to change it. So I have import React. I want to import the Cognito user pool from, and then it's going to be Amazon Cognito identity-js. So we're importing that. We're not going to use the React logo, and I don't really need any CSS. Okay. Normally what ends up happening is we have a function. Okay. Then that function exports. I think that's fine. What I want to do is I want to set up my return. So you can kind of see the return right here is an HTML return. So I want to get rid of all of that return. And what I want to do is I want to build an HTML form. Okay, so I want to build a form. And the form, I want a couple of things going on. I want the form to have an input for the email and an input for the password. Okay, so I'm going to say input. So an input for the username. So the input will be type equal to text. And then I'm going to have an input for the password. So input type equal to text. And that's problematic that it would be text. It probably should be password, but okay, for now I want to be able to see the password. And then I want to have a submit button. So I'm going to have a button. And the button is going to be to sign up for a new account. So there's my button. Okay, and then that's going to be my form. So that's what I want to return. Okay, so I go ahead and save it. So I've saved that file. I kick over to Chrome, and you can see what my form looks like. This is the email. This is the password. And then I have my submit button to sign up. Okay, and I'm not concerned about my user interface or styling at all, as you can tell. I don't even have labels, so pretty bare bones here. What I want to do with my application is I want to take this username and password and check against my Cognito user pool and see if, or actually create a new user account in that Cognito user pool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some data about my pool. So here's a constant called pool data, and it's going to be a JSON object. The pool data needs a user pool ID, and it also needs a client ID. Okay, the user pool ID, if we go back over, well, we have our client ID, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that. So here's my client ID, and that's in the app clients. And then the user pool ID is going to be under general settings, and right at the very top is my pool ID. Okay, so those are the two things that I'm going to need. Then I should be able to create a user pool object. So I'm going to say const user pool is equal to new Cognito user pool. And I'm going to pass in my pool data. Okay, and I'm going to make that camel case. It's a constant. So that's my user pool. And then this takes a little bit more intricate knowledge of React. But essentially what's going to happen is I have a function which is representing a class or a component, and that component is going to have data. It's going to have an email and a password. so like instance variables. The way instance variables work with a form is in React wants to mirror any instance variable data that would be represented in my form. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to use state. So up here in React, I'm going to say go ahead and use state. Just put some spacing there. That's part of the React library. And then in order to do that, I'm going to set up a couple of references essentially. So I'm going to have the email equal to use state. And I'm going to do the same thing for the password. Okay, so those are the two instance variables that I'm going to use. And the idea and the reason for these two constants is I want this input field right here to mirror this email variable, and then same thing, this text field right here to mirror this password text field. And what I mean by mirror is the data that's stored in this instance variable should then populate this text box, and as the user types in this text box, these instance variables get updated. Okay, so the way we're going to handle that is we're going to say that the value is equal to, and this is more React syntax, it's equal to the email. And then I have to basically, every time something's changed, I have to then set the email. So I'm going to say onChange equal to some event where I trigger the method setEmail, and I'm going to pass in the event.target.value. And then I have to essentially do the same thing for the password. Okay, so the value is going to equal password. And then as the user changes it, so onChange, it's going to trigger some event called setPassword. And the idea is the event.target.value. The event.target is really that text box, and then the value of the text box is what's getting passed into the setPassword and setEmail. Okay, so I have Prettier installed, so you'll notice when I saved it reformatted some of my code. Okay, so I think we're okay there now. So if I come back over, I can type, and when I type in these text boxes, what's really happening is there's an onChange event occurring, and that onChange event is then setting this email and password. Okay, so that's how this is working. So again, a little more React than I'd want to get into, but it is what it is. Ultimately, though, what we want to do is we want this button to then create a user account. Okay, so what we're going to do is in the form, we're going to say onSubmit. It's going to trigger a function called onSubmit. Okay, so we're basically saying this form onSubmit, which is triggered when this submit button's clicked, is going to trigger an event named onSubmit. So we need an onSubmit event. So here's our onSubmit event. It's going to be equal to some event handler. And just so we can verify that this is working, we can do a log submitted. But in order to do that, we better not actually submit this. So we're going to say prevent the default action, which would be to submit our form. Okay, so now we should be able to see that that message shows up in our console. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and inspect and refresh. Okay, so now when I click on this button, you'll notice that in the console I get that submitted action. So this button is triggering that every time I click. So this button is now associated with this onSubmit event because the form's onSubmit event is tied to that event handler. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create a user account. Okay, so we're going to use our user pool object that we have. So user pool dot sign up. We need to pass in the email. We need to pass in the password. And then we have a couple of options that we can kind of ignore for now. And then lastly, we're going to get essentially a callback. So we're signing up with this email and password and then any other options that we'd want to set. But essentially what's going to happen is we're going to get a confirmation. Either that was successful, that the user was signed up and the account was created, or it wasn't. So we have to handle that through a callback. And the way the callback works is we get a function definition that either the error is populated or we get data back from the callback. So eventually this function that we're creating right here is going to get invoked, whether the signup was successful or unsuccessful. And the way we can tell whether it's successful or unsuccessful is if the error is populated, it was unsuccessful. Otherwise, if the error is not populated, then we can start to look at the data and see what's going on. Okay, so the way we're going to handle this is if the error object exists, then let's log the error object. And instead of logging it, let's use console.error and just output that error message. So if there's an error, we'll write it to the console. Otherwise, what we want to do is just log the data. Okay, so now if I try to sign up, so I want to sign up, I'll use my Gmail account, and then I'm going to type in a password, ABC123. And this is going to be an invalid password. It's not going to meet our password complexity requirements. So if you remember when we created our pool, I can't remember where that is actually set. I think it's under attributes. Nope. Policies. Yep. So 8-character length. We require a number, a special character, and upper and lowercase letters. So this is going to fail. I know that. And I can see it in plain text. That's going to be another issue, but we chose to have an input type equal to text. When I sign up, what's going to happen is I eventually get an error saying I'm not authorized, I'm not unable to verify the secret hash for this client. Okay, and I think I was looking at this earlier, so that secret hash is for my client. And where do I set that? App clients, show details. I don't want a secret hash. Where do I set that though? Okay, so this error has to do with the fact that I set up my app client incorrectly for this tutorial at least. So if I go back over, my app client has this app client secret, and I'd have to pass additional information to this app client. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete my existing app client, and I'm going to add a new app client. And in this case, I'm going to say I don't want to generate a client secret. I'm just going to call my app client web again. I'm going to create it. It has a new client ID, so I'm going to copy that. Okay, and then under my domain name, still set up, looks good. The only thing I have to change in my React application is if I go back over, I now have to change my client ID. Okay, so I've updated my client ID. My application is reloaded because it's running through npm, and I want to try that same thing. So I'm going to use my email account and then ABC123. It doesn't meet my password complexity requirements, and you'll notice that I'm now getting that error message saying that I have an invalid password that didn't conform with the password policy. So what I want to do is I want to create a password that's a strong password. So instead of A, I'll use @ and then ABC123, and then I'm going to use my uppercase letters. Okay, so now this should be a valid password. I'm using special character. It's more than 8 characters long, lower case and uppercase and numbers. So now if I clear my console, when I sign up, you'll notice that I get that this Cognito user was created. Okay, it gives me my user sub, it gives me my code delivery details. It tells me that the user confirmed is false. I have not confirmed that that's a valid user account. So I could log into my email and I should see an email message. I'm going to go ahead and do that, but I'm going to pause the video so you can't see my whole email inbox in case I have something sensitive in there. So I'll go ahead and bring up Gmail. And here you'll see that confirmation email that I received from my Cognito user pool. Okay, I could also go back over to my user pools. So I'll show you kind of back and forth here. In my user pools, under users and groups, if I hit this refresh icon, there'll be an unconfirmed user account. Okay, so I could come in here and click on this and confirm this user. So I could look at this and say, yep, go ahead and confirm that user. So I could manually do it, but right now that user's unconfirmed until I go to Gmail and I hit verify that email. And now you'll notice the URL shows up. My registration's been confirmed. And now if I go back to my user pool with the users and groups, you can see that I have a confirmed user account. Okay, so I don't want to get into too much detail about this React application, but this user pool is a whole API. So right now we have the sign up process enabled. So we have one method where we're passing in an email and password, and we're saying that this user pool and this client ID is what we're using. We can also use it to authenticate. We can also use it to recover passwords. We can also use it to log out. So we can use Cognito user pools with auth, so it allows us to sign in using Facebook or Google or Twitter. So Cognito user pools are really kind of powerful. What I really wanted to do with this video is just kind of introduce you to the concept of a Cognito user pool and how that might be used in the wild. And the fact of the matter is I'm a JavaScript developer, so I wanted to show you kind of that integration with React.